how amphibian operates. The first site is migration, the second one is spirituality, and third one ecology. So we have our focus is on three major sites, which represent how what amphibian is. The question what we raise here is, you know, how do we imagine a social life? And that's a common concern which we share in all the discussions and events. How do we imagine a life in the time of precarity, or in a time of certain ecological concerns, certain kind of movement of people which are not addressed properly as migration, or a movement of refugees, movement of people seeking asylums in different countries, slaves, sometimes even endangered slaves who are constantly on move. And another aspect of the discussion is hydrosociality of our life, which has not been very adequately addressed in our discussions. What comes from sea? Why do we, sea as a method or ocean as a method, which has been very less discussed in most of our academic discussion, our discussions also. So hydrosociality of our life is very important. How water defines our life, how water shapes our identity, how water, becomes a matter to address certain things, and sometimes even the kind of objects which flows through water, certain materials which flows through water, which is very important in the context, especially of Kerala. We have a lot of instances of travel of objects from one place to another. We keep in our custody. I mean, if you look at certain merchant houses in Kerala, you would see a huge repository of objects which came through sea. I have an experience of dealing with some of the objects which are kept in the custody of a family in Talasheri. I have identified at least 100 objects which all came through sea, and you wouldn't know where does it come from, and you wouldn't know the history of it. We assume something and we present it as something which is under the custody of someone. We are not keen to get a clear picture of where does it come from or what history it has. So this is also about the travel of objects, travel of materials, and especially what Varuni is going to talk on, very interesting, the materiality of certain things, which is very important in the context of religion and spirituality. And we have James to speak on the kind of exchanges which represented, which characterized the movement of goods, ideas, people, and certain kind of ideologies also, which were in what kind of impacts it created within a local context of Kerala, within the local context of Gulf as well. He would see to that through the perspective of Gulf. So we have three speakers, two are academic, and one is half academic and half not, academic come artist. And I would actually start with James. James is professor at American University, Sharjah. And there is a nice coincidence. His father is a famous Canadian artist who has visited Cochin in 1980s. He has done a very interesting, project, which is called the Walls of India, for mobilizing fund for an organization. So when he traveled extensively in Kerala, wrote many things about Kerala. So I would actually ask James to elaborate more on that. And anyway, I'm inviting Professor James to speak on the kind of movement of people which we had between the Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula to be more exact, and this part of India.
The exhibition examines the ecology, migration, and spirituality under the umbrella concept of amphibian aesthetics. These themes and their unifying conceptual frame are based on a millennia of cultural connections that have made Indians and Arabs cultural cousins, embodied by Kerala's Indo-Arab community, the Maplas. My paper provides some of the historical background and context for these themes in the exhibition, following each of these three themes in turn. So they're just representative, symbolic illustrations of the three themes of the exhibition. My talk today is based on a paper that I published last year called Cultural Cousins, Indo-Gulf Connections Since Antiquity, which you can see here. It's available online with the Journal of Arabian Studies. You can download it, it's open access. Now for the first theme, ecology. The ancient interconnectedness within Indo-Arabia is best illustrated by the way in which the ecologies and economies of India, Arabia, and the Persian Gulf were intertwined by the monsoon, a word intimately associated with India and the Indian Ocean, but which comes from the Gulf region, from mausim, meaning season in both Arabic and Persian. Ships have used the monsoon winds to sail across the Arabian Sea between India, Arabia, and the Persian Gulf for millennia, with the Persian Gulf being the closest, having the oldest connections, dating back at least 4,600 years. For over 4,600 years, therefore, Indo-Arabian ship voyages were governed by the Indian Ocean's rainy southwest monsoon and its dry northeast monsoon until steamships eventually replaced sailing ships during the 1860s to 1950s. Gulf dhows heading to India had two sailing seasons during the era of sail. The start of the southwest monsoon from mid-March until mid-May, and the end of the southwest monsoon from mid-August until late September or early October. India's ports were closed to shipping during the height of the southwest monsoon from late May to mid-August due to the heavy rains and strong winds here in India. The entire northeast monsoon from early October to mid-March was good for westbound dhows sailing from India to the Persian Gulf. The sailing season was synchronized with the Persian Gulf's other two main economic activities, the pearling industry and the date industry, as you can see here. So when the ports of India were closed, that is when pearling and the date harvest season was. Once the ports were open here in India, the sailing season commenced, and all of the dates that were harvested over the summer and all of the pearls that were harvested from the Gulf waters were placed on these dhows and they were sent to India to be sold. So these were synchronized systems, or synchronized seasons, I should say. Arabia and the Gulf have no forests from which to build ships. So where did the wood that built Arab dhows come from? They came from here, from Kerala, from Malabar teak. The first Arab dhows were built on commission on these very shores. But how did the Arabs get here in the first place? Today they fly. But back then, without wood to build ships, how could one come here? Indo-Gulf connections started with ships from Harappa, the Indus Valley civilization, that sailed to the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, over 4,600 years ago. The Harappans obtained wood for their ships from the forests of the Himalayan foothills and from the forests of Gujarat. Later, the Gulf Arabs obtained ships of their own, built from Indian wood, purchased from the Harappans. This enabled them to sail east along the coast of the Arabian Sea, all the way down to Kerala. Here, they found a thriving boat-building industry. The Arabs began to commission ships built of Malabar teak, right here. The famous Greek shipping guide, the Persepolis of the Erythraean Sea, written in the 1st century, describes Mazaris, the famous ancient port just north of here, as, quote, abounding in ships, end quote, including traffic from Arabia. That's 2,000 years ago. This connection continues to the present day. All Gulf dhows are still built with teak from Kerala, and some of the largest are still built in Kerala by boat building firms like this one in Calicut. The Malabar coast's ancient connections with the Persian Gulf are symbolized by the Indo-Gulf origins of its name. Mala, from Malayalam, meaning hill or mountain, referring to the western Ghats that run parallel to the coast, and Bar, from Persian meaning coast, a suffix added by the Persian and Arab traders who connected the Gulf and India across the ages. While the name Malabar, sometimes spelled Malabar or Malibar with the ya instead of the alif, was commonly used for the Malabar coast in both India and the Gulf, Persians and Arabs also referred to this coast as the Pepper Coast, after its most famous export, which was a key commodity in the ancient spice trade. Second theme, migration. It was only natural that the Indians, Arabs, and Persians sailing across the Arabian Sea, from one end of Indo-Arabia to the other, would begin to settle as they waited for the next southwest or northeast monsoon to return home. Some of them put down roots and established local wholesale or retail businesses or worked as craftsmen. The earliest written account of Indians in the Gulf is this cuneiform tablet, recording the words of the Akkadian king, Sargon, who ruled during 2334 to 2279 BCE, in which he mentions the ships of Mahala, which was the Akkadian name for the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, anchored at the city of Akkad. There's also this cylinder seal dating from 2200 to 2113, belonging to an Akkadian translator of Mahalan, indicating the presence of Mahalan merchants at Akkad in Iraq. The earliest written description in Arabic that we have of Indians in the Persian Gulf region comes from this account, written by Abu Zayd as-Sarifi in or before 915. The accounts of India and China is a compilation of Gulf sailors' travel accounts to South Asia and East Asia, which was one of the source texts for the Sinbad stories. In it, Sarafi explains how the Hindus come to Saraf, which was Iran's largest port at the time. And when some Arab merchant invites them to a feast, their number often approaches or exceeds 100. But a separate dish needs to be served before each, and none of them can eat off anyone else's dish. The large Hindu merchant community in early 10th century Sharaf, described by As-Sarifi, would have remained there until Saraf's decline following a devastating earthquake in 977. After which it most likely relocated to the island of Kish off the Iranian coast, when it became the Gulf's leading port. When Hormuz rose to prominence in the 13th century, contributing to Kish's decline, the community probably migrated there. During the height of Hormuz's prosperity, from the early 14th to the early 16th century, the presence of 2,000 Gujarati households, both Hindu and Muslim, on the island gave Hormuz the feeling of an Indian city. After Hormuz was destroyed as a trading center by the combined Safavid English force in 1622, the Indian community dispersed to Bandar Abbas and Muscat. The oldest community in the Gulf today, also Hindu, like the one in Saraf, seems to be the one in Muscat, which dates to at least the early 15th century. The Ratansi Purushottam family that you see here are one of the Oman's oldest resident Indian family businesses in Muscat. They are Bhatia Hindus from the port of Mandvi and Kutch, whose connection with Oman dates back to 1838. Of all the Gulf states, Oman has the strongest historical, cultural, and commercial connections with the Indian subcontinent. The second oldest is probably the Hindu community in Manama, in Bahrain, first mentioned in Dutch records in 1667, but which almost certainly is older than that. These are Bhatia Hindus, but from Tata in Sindh. This is from the ruler Sharjah's private photography collection that I recently helped curate, that's now on display in the photography gallery, part of the Sharjah Art Foundation's exhibition spaces in Sharjah, where I live. The third oldest is the Lawati community in Matra, which is next to Old Muscat, which dates from the mid-18th century. This community is now thoroughly Arabized and are Omani citizens. These merchants, tradesmen, and family members who made up these communities came mainly from Sindh, Kutch, and Gujarat. There were, of course, corresponding Arab and Persian merchant communities here in India. The oldest, and one of the best, and the one that best embodies the antiquity of Indo-Arabia, is the Mapla community, formed originally from the offspring of Indo-Arab marriages here in Kerala. The Mapla community is as old as Islam itself and are India's oldest Muslim community. Arab seafarers along the Malabar coast settled here because it was too far from Arabia for them to return in the same year after a sea voyage here. They had to wait for the next northeast monsoon from early October to mid-March to return home. So they settled down and took local wives, the legacy of which are the Maplas. Over time, the Mapla community expanded through local conversions and the incorporation of other groups. So today, not all Maplas have have Arab ancestry. Some do, some do not. The Maplas of Kannur had their own royal family, the Arakal, who ruled from 1545 to 1819. Here you have one member of them here. The term Mapla was originally used for all Abrahamic foreigners, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, who integrated into Kerala society through intermarriage. The term originally meant, or carried rather, the meaning of son-in-law or respected one, but today generally means a member of the original Malabar Muslim community, which accounts for the majority of Muslims in Kerala today and a quarter of all people in Kerala. The South Asian communities in the ports and caravan towns of the Gulf and the corresponding Arab and Persian communities in India's coastal cities were and are a physical manifestation of the intimate connections between the two shores of the Arabian Sea in every aspect of daily life. Before the dawn of the oil era in the 1950s and 60s, South Asian communities in the Gulf were small and largely mercantile, numbering in the low thousands. Since the oil era, the South Asian communities in the Gulf have expanded dramatically. As of 2024, almost 9 million Indians and 4 million Pakistanis live in the Gulf. Indians form the largest expat communities in each Gulf state and even outnumber the national populations in Qatar and the UAE. In the case of the UAE, there's about 10 million people in the country. 4.1 of them are Indians. That's NRIs, not including OCIs or PIOs, just NRIs. The last part of my talk is spirituality. The theme of spirituality is perhaps best illustrated by the famous legend of the last king of all Kerala, Ramavarma Kulashakara, whose title was Cheraman Perumal, meaning Lord of the Cheras, which is the story about how Islam came to Kerala. Islam is naturally Arabia's greatest influence on South Asia. The form of Islam and the Muslim communities that emerged here in South Asia are a fusion of Arab and Indian elements. They are one of the most obvious examples of cultural confluence in the Indo-Arabian world. Briefly, I'll now explain to you or give you an overview of one of these legends. There are two legends. One that takes place during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, and the other which takes place 200 years later. One is championed by the Mapla community, the first one, and the second one is championed by those who are the descendants of Hadramati, mostly Sufi peers, missionaries from Yemen. The king of Kerala, so the story goes like this. The king of Kerala at the time of the life of the prophet witnessed the Prophet Muhammad's miracle of the splitting of the moon from his palace in Koldangalore, just north of here. Later, he asked some Hijazi merchants visiting the port of Mazaras, which is next to Koldangalore, about the miracle. They explained the miracle to him and told him about the prophet, who was preaching a new religion called Islam. He therefore sailed to the Hijaz and Mecca to visit the Prophet. Upon meeting the Prophet, the king converted to Islam, becoming India's first Muslim. He also became a companion of the Prophet and spent much time with him. After 5 years, the king sailed back to Kerala with some other companions of the Prophet in order to spread Islam in Kerala. They stopped at Salala along the way, where the king took ill and died. And the king was buried there. His tomb, which you see here, is called the Cheraman Perumal Maqam. The rest of the missionary party continued on to Kerala, landing at Mazaras, where they met the king's deputy. They presented him with a letter from the king authorizing them to spread Islam here in Kerala. The deputy granted them land to build mosques, the first of which was this mosque, housed in an abandoned Buddhist temple, which was named after the king, the Chairman Juma Masjid, or the Chairman Friday Mosque, in Kadungalore, which is 30 kilometers north of where we are now. Today, the Chairman Jumad Masjid in Kerala and the Chairman Perumal Makam in Oman, located on opposite shores of the Arabian Sea, and the legend of the King of Kerala that unites them, symbolize the profoundness of India and Arabia's historical connections across the sea. And this concludes my paper. Thank you for listening.
Delay in getting the presentation loaded. The title of my presentation, as you can see, it's Deus in Machina, the amphibian materiality of the spiritual. I thank Ilias for inviting me and Riaz for also sending me those emails and inviting me here, Anuj for everything that he's done to make this process a really smooth one. And more than anything else, for making me think about the term amphibian in the context of the work that I do. I should say that there's a little bit of amphibian nature in who I am as an academic. So I'm a historian in terms of my livelihood. I teach history to undergraduate students, but I'm identify myself primarily as a scholar of religion. Religion as a field of study is not something that we do in India. It's not a specialized field of study. It is done through the lens of sociology, anthropology, literature, history, and so on and so forth. But we rarely ever think about studying religion as an object, objectively speaking. But that's something that I do, and I think there is great worth in doing that. So, given my own amphibian nature between religious studies and history, some of the other work that I've been doing has been around studying religious content that circulates on social media platforms. And so I'm hoping that everything that I say over here will be deeply familiar in some senses to you, that there's actually nothing really remarkably new that I'll be saying, but hopefully there'll be some kind of a fresh perspective that I'll be able to show. So as a point of departure, I'm just going to quote who I turn to as a very important thinker around the question of religion and the material around the relationship between religion and man in the German idealist tradition, which is Ludwig Feuerbach. He is best known as the person against whom Marx famously wrote his thesis, the 10 Theses on Feuerbach, which ended with his very famous quote, "Philosophers have analyzed the world, but the job is to change it." Now, Feuerbach is a Hegelian, left Hegelian, like Marx. He grows up in a very conservative, sort of a very believing Protestant family in Germany, and is training to be a theologian when he gets really, impressed and moves to Hegel's circles, gives up his theologian's career, becomes a philosopher. And he really becomes a philosopher who thinks very deeply about the relationship between the spiritual and the material. And one of the points that he makes, which then becomes really the point that he goes on and on making and becomes the basis of sort of the turn that will happen in German idealism, is that theology is anthropology. That those are his famous words, that the study of God, or the way in which we understand God, is really the study of humans. And the way in which he reads it is that humans project man. This was 1820s, so we're dealing with man. That man projects what is the best possible for mankind onto a blank screen and calls it God. And that is the nature of theology. So theology is anthropology because really you're projecting yourself, or what is the nature of yourself, onto a blank screen and then calling that God and creating a religion around it. And to me, what is really interesting is the way in which he understands the idea of projection. And this is at a time in the context where the earliest of cameras are going to develop. So I'm linking it a little bit to technological developments that are also going to take place, but a few decades here and there, well, a few decades into the future. He also says that when we make that projection, we start to give that projection more power. That becomes the all powerful thing. So it is the image that we prefer over the thing, the copy to the original, the representation to the reality. And therefore, what is sacred is only an illusion. And therefore, basically, the sacred grows to such an extent that illusion keeps on increasing, and that becomes what is the nature of religion. Now, he is responding in a big measure to the kind of Enlightenment critiques of religion that are also coming, made by Kant, made by David Hume at the time. And he really takes it to, people have even called him an atheist, even though I don't think he quite is an atheist in the same way. He's quite a defender of Christianity in some senses. But what I find very powerful about what he says is this whole idea of how to think about projection, and to think about projection in terms of how does technology help us thinking about projection in that sense, right? Which brings me to some of you may be familiar with this. These are actually screen grabs from Anand Patwardhan's film Ram Ke Naam, which was made on the first Ram Janmabhoomi movement that happened in 1989, and talked about the way in which this entire process of mobilizing in order to bring down the mosque, the Babri Masjid, and to build a Ram temple in its place was taking place. And I thought that there was something incredibly powerful about the way in which the idea of the image and projection, particularly through a technological intervention, can be seen over here, where, the Lord appeared, the people are worshipping it, and the Lord appeared. And the way in which you bring together concepts of awe and wonder in the understanding of religion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So here's the title of my talk, which is Deus in Machina. And it takes off from an older sort of Greek concept in dramaturgy, which is Deus ex machina, where in Greek drama, basically God, mostly Zeus, would be kind of swung in, often on a crane or through some other kind of theatrical device, to come and resolve a vexed situation at hand. And that Deus ex machina, which is God through a machine, or God out of a machine, was seen to be something very, very unpalatable, particularly when it came to the kind of Enlightenment critiques of religion done by, say, people like Kant and David Hume that I spoke about earlier, who basically established this idea of God who was not bound by the human realm. So there was a complete separation between God and the human realm. There's a complete separation. Gods do not enter the human realm. So Kant would say God is a priori. Hume would say there's a watchmaker God. God creates the world and then lets it be. God cannot come and change how the watch operates once God has made the world, and so on. What I want to think about in this paper is actually God in the machine. How technology abets a certain experience of God, and think about spirituality through materiality. It's not a new question. Spirituality through materiality is the material sort of expression of divinity is not a new question at all. I was at the Mattancherry Palace today, and I was looking at the murals where the entire Ramayana has been narrated, or the kind of fantastic representations of deities that we are very familiar living in the context of South Asia, or particularly India, in kind of looking at all time. But in this case, what I want to talk about is materiality through technology. And I want to link it to the question of wonder and the question of divinity, the idea of holy as understood primarily through the concept of wonder, which is a concept that I'm taking from another German thinker, this time a 20th century thinker, Rudolf Otto, who strongly sort of stands a little bit askance to the kind of understanding of religion that we have developing at the time through Max Weber, Durkheim, Sigmund Freud, and basically would say that the idea of religious experience or the idea of a religious feeling is very, very central to what religion is, and that religious experience is fundamentally dependent upon the idea of wonder. The term he uses is awe. So it can be fear, it can be trembling, it can be palpitations, it can be speechlessness. But that is the idea of divinity that exists. That notion of wonder, for me, was very helpful in understanding what was happening with the different kinds of WhatsApp forwards. And I'm particularly talking about WhatsApp as a social media platform. So there is a platform specificity that I am interested in, as well as the kind of images that have been doing the rounds on WhatsApp. These are images that I have been sort of looking at and collecting since 2019 or so. So the earliest of images you will see here is from 2019, and the most recent one is from the Kumbh Mela that happened a few months ago. When I look at this image, for instance, when it came on WhatsApp and I downloaded this image, there was something else that was happening. The lotuses were pulsating. The halo behind the Ganesha's head was also pulsating. There were lights, lamps that were lighting up. And these are things, I'm a historian, I don't know how to do these things, but I'm sure all of you are well aware that a basic Photoshop or a basic kind of Canva can just add these kinds of things to what is otherwise an image that comes from the print media. So there is an intermediality and intertextuality that's working very much over here. So some of these themes I looked at in the earlier papers that I have written, two of which are up here, which are about digital Hinduism and kind of popular Hinduism and how that circulates on social media platforms like WhatsApp. The one point that I want to make over here in this context is how short or how quick this material comes and goes. And therefore, grabbing attention is very, very important. So if you look at your WhatsApp and you're scrolling and you're getting messages, and let's say it's a festival and you're getting, 20 to 30 messages in the morning of that festival. My article was on Holi, so I was looking at Holi pictures. Something has to grab your attention. And the sensorium that gets built around the usage of color, the kind of physical response you have, but that physical response has to happen in less than a second, because that's how you will stop scrolling. You will click on something, and under a minute, you would have either forwarded it or moved on or not done anything with it, that kind of a thing. So to understand that the particular technology that we are talking about is also of the kind which does not allow you to dwell deeply. So it is a lot about grabbing attention and creating that sensorium in a very, very, very short period of time. And from there, I thought a little bit about how do I think about amphibian in this context. And, I went back to kind of thinking about what does amphibian really mean and what are the meanings of the term that it has. And as you can see, it is having two modes of existence or of doubtful nature. So, the way in which things started to fall in place for me was that the amphibian nature of the spiritual that we are looking at via the triad of representation or projection, or wonder and digital technology really works in a way where you think about this content as having having two simultaneous forms of existence, which means that you're never really clear what the content is doing. But it is powerful enough to hold your attention and make you go through it. And I have a few ways in which, kind of I've divided it up. So there is the material and the spiritual, which is, what is the medium, what is the message, the secret and the revealed, the local and the global, there's public and private, political and religious, and satire and critique. And I will show you images now and just fun content that I have saved from WhatsApp messages for each one of these, and hopefully some of the arguments that I'm trying to make will become clear. Yeah, is to think about the different modes of existence, particularly two different modes of existence that you can see on religious content that you receive and consume on social media. Largely my argument being that it is very, very hard to place that content in any clear category, and that you are left wondering what is the role, what is the messaging that this content is doing. So this is on the day of the inauguration of the Ram Temple on 22nd January 2024. There was a meme that went around on the left where Ram written in Devanagari script was then changed into the date on which the inauguration was taking place. So this whole idea that there is a certain revelation that exists in the date itself and in the name of Ram as well. And the other thing that did the rounds was this particular meme. I'm just going to play it. Can you reduce the volume, please, of the, yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I said. It's going to be very loud music. So this was another meme that did the rounds, and the whole idea was to show the date and then have the music, the background music, which I'll talk about a little bit, but it is really the title song from Adi Purush, which had been released, I believe, in October or November the previous year. And while the movie was panned and was considered to be really irreligious and showing Hindu deities in this kind of, non-devotional, non-reverential form, this particular music ends up being used as the background music on several kinds of memes that do the round. Okay. The other thing that also did the rounds when the Ram Temple was done is this completely fake news that RBI had issued new notes of 500 rupees with the temple in the background and the face of Ram instead of the face of Gandhi over there. Obviously, it was absolutely fake news, but what does it mean to circulate it? And also, what does it mean when God and money, or God becomes the face of money, which really, if you think about the late 19th century, God and money were both being analyzed through the category of fetish. Similarly, on the right, there was an image from Nifty, and then it was linked together in a way to say that, even Nifty was showing the architecture of the Ram Temple in it.
I invite Susmita to speak on.
Hi, everybody. I think I'm going to adapt to the site and the situation here. So unlike Varuni and James, I am not an academic. I'm anything but an academic. I have, professionally speaking, of the 28 odd years, I have spent about 15 years in human space exploration, designing space habitats, rovers, spacesuits, and even testing prototypes in analog environments. For example, if we design something for Mars, we would test it in Rio Tinto in Spain or Lanzarote. In the future, maybe Ladakh has lunar escapes. Anything for the moon, we test it underwater because it's a reduced gravity environment. So I've spent about 15 years doing that, first through NASA and Boeing, and then through my companies. I set up 3 companies, small companies in San Francisco, Vienna, and then Bangalore. I spent 7 years launching stuff on rockets. Again, not academic at all. And I spent 5 years doing soft diplomacy between Washington, D.C. and Delhi to make it possible for Americans to launch satellites on an Indian rocket, despite the sanctions of 1998. And then I spent 3 years agonizing over climate and how to use open source satellite imagery to build models. And after the pandemic, I run a space think tank. So it's all about space law and policy. Today, what I'm about to talk to you about is through a collective that I co-founded with two of my friends back in 2007, while I was still living in San Francisco. It's an all-women's collective, and we look at the reciprocities in design and architecture. So I'm transdisciplinary. I have 4 different degrees: engineering, architecture, as an aerospace architecture, industrial design, and space studies. So as a all-women collective, my other 2 co-pilots, one of them is an industrial designer based in Vancouver, where James is from, and Barbara Imhoff, she's an architect based in Vienna. We presented, so thanks to Riaz, who invited us to be part of the Amphibious Aesthetics exhibition, we decided to bring in one of our residencies, which we did in 2022 in Scotland. We were on a loch, as in a lake, in Argyll and Bute, which is north of Glasgow. It's where the lake meets the Firth of Clyde, so it's an ocean lake situation. And the 3 of us, Barbara, Sue, and I, also invited a friend who's a contemporary architect from Delhi, Rohini Devashar, to join us for the residency. And we spent almost a month lochside. And the 4 of us, given our different backgrounds, we looked at the space we were in multiple ways. So what I'm going to do is I'll avoid the computer entirely, because I'd encourage you to go see our exhibition, which is called Amphibious Futures in Harlequin House, which is down the road. And there was a video that's also part of the exhibition. So let's say bye-bye to technology here. I mean, it's much better. And the world I come from, Rama, for example, has nothing to do with that Rama. The only Rama that I associated with some years ago is for the European Space Agency. We designed a rover which could work on the moon and it could work on Mars and would allow astronauts to do sorties of up to 2 weeks in either of the environments. And we call it Rama, inspired by Arthur Clarke's Rama Chronicles. So Amphibious Futures, we look at the word amphibious in multiple ways. And what I have here is a field notebook, which, thanks to Riaz and team, we were able to take the field notes that we took during our residency in Scotland. We created a field notebook, and some of the posters you see in the exhibition are from the field notebook. Since my co-pilots are missing, I'm going to read from some micro essays that are part of the field notebook. We spent nearly a month in residence at Cove Park, Scotland, in June of 2022, immersing ourselves in the shifting conditions of the sea's edge. Each of us explored this liminal space in our own way through photographs, personal notes, videos, performances, and other immersive, environmentally prompted material experiments. As the weeks passed, a shared impulse began to take shape, and by the 3rd week, we felt drawn to gather what we had seen, experienced, thought, to translate the residency into something tangible. So we wanted to record our reflections and observations and weave together the many photographs or fragments of them or collected objects and revisit the experience from new perspectives. And it felt like an opening, perhaps towards an artwork or a book project. And thanks to Amphibious Aesthetics, it did manifest as a book project as well. So when you visit the exhibition, what you will see is not necessarily a conclusion or resolution of any kind, but a conversation between the four of us who are part of the residency, between observation and imagination and provocation, and between what we saw and what you, as visitors, as people who go see our exhibition, might discover along the sea's edge. And while we were at Loch Long, so I think let's talk about the word amphibious a little bit from a Loch Long perspective, but this is again through my lens before I read a little bit of my microessay. To me, amphibious could mean anything. It could be terrestrial, extraterrestrial. It could be land and liquid, which could be water, could be any other form of any other medium. It could also be variable gravity. You know, when Dima was sitting here and talking to Anuj about imaginary architectures, you guys were talking about, an installation sort of popped in my head. Imagine the children of Gaza are given this gigantic dial, like a knob, which they can turn and choose which gravity field they want to be in. And the moon is 1/6 gravity, Mars is 1/3. So if they, in an amphibious sense, they turn the dial to a gravity where all of the rubble kind of lifts up and floats up. You know, so they can almost control the futures through this gigantic knob, which is a gravity knob. So amphibious in that sense, I think even Varuni brought it out very interestingly in terms of the amphibiousness of, you know, what she was talking about, like politics and religion and real and representative. So for me, it's often along these elements which are environmental, being a spaceship designer, and we on Earth take for granted. Gravity is one such element. It could also be atmospheric pressure. Here, we're sitting here because of the atmospheric pressure, we're comfortably sitting here. And if you were, let's say, on the moon with no atmosphere, your veins would burst, which is why you need, you know, things like spacesuits and stuff. I also want to let me talk a little bit through Susan Fairbairn's microessay. She's an industrial designer and also has a sort of a biology background. So she's written this microessay called Coastline Paradox. She writes, what ties the edge of space to the edges of sea and body? She's looking at the blurs that separate the edges, right? She says, from cosmic reefs to the tidal folds of Loch Long, from the alveoli of our lungs to the branching patterns of coastlines, the study of edges has long unsettled our measures. My fascination lies in how shifting scales draw our attention to what moves through, along, and across these thresholds. I will sort of move on to the last paragraph of her essay, which says, in this time of climate catastrophe, perhaps we must move beyond measurement and turn instead towards a new understanding of edges as dynamic, porous, and alive. I will read another tiny little paragraph from another micro essay. This is one of my friends who lives in a village near Loch Long. We invited her on one of our expeditions into the Firth of Clyde, into the ocean. And she's lived there for many years now. But this was the first time she looked at where she lives from a completely different perspective, because up until then, she had looked at land either from a ferry or in a way that was a safe, framed, contained view of the place that she lived in. So she's in a boat with us, a Zodiac, a very small inflatable boat. I'll read a couple of sentences from her essay. In a small boat, these waters transform. The scale shifts. We become smallness itself, adrift in a vast, otherworldly space. Each wave a powerful gust of wind, The land recedes, a smudge on the horizon, a flat canvas streaked with color, deep green, mustard, brown, dark indigo. Here in the water, life stirs. Seals surface and splash, close enough to smell their wildness. Jellyfish drift in abundance. This is their realm. A shipwreck turns into an island. Those of us who do not dive search for a place to climb, forever seeking solid ground, even if that ground is a fragment of a floating wreck. The illusion of stability is enough. So this friend, she's an anthropologist and a storyteller, but I think you can see the discovery of the amphibiousness in the place that she inhabits. She had never experienced it this way until she met us and came along with us on this little expedition. I will wrap up with a couple of, maybe one of the paragraphs of the concluding essay in our field notebook. It's called Between Worlds, Amphibious Futures of Our Solar Backyard, our immediate neighborhood in the solar system. Space billionaires often present themselves as saviors of humanity, claiming that they are developing spacecraft capable of transporting us to Mars as a means of averting our species' extinction. Some even proclaim their ambitions unabashedly, emblazoning slogans such as, quote unquote, Occupy Mars on company merchandise. The prospect of humanity becoming an interplanetary species is undeniably exciting, yet it is one that must be approached with caution and conscience. My own aspirations, at least within our solar neighborhood, are not drawn to Mars, but to the icy moons of the outer planets, Jupiter's Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede, and Saturn's Enceladus and Titan. These distant worlds are believed to harbor vast subsurface oceans of liquid water beneath their frozen crusts, maintained in a fluid state by tidal forces exerted by their parent planets. So again, the word amphibious to us really is a very broad term in how we interpret it. And I think I'll wrap up with a quote from one of my many mentors, the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke. He's believed to have said, "How inappropriate that we call this planet Earth when it's quite clearly ocean." Thank you.